Hi guys, so today I'm going to be doing a video on Ivan Illich. There's a book of his called Deschooling Society that I want to quickly skim over. I've already got to page 12, and in fact I think I read about him first in this article from Supermemory Guru. Was basically has a pretty good summary of his life and who he was, and to me it seems clear that a lot of Woz's philosophy regarding schooling has been influenced by Ivan Illich. So that was the first time I heard of Ivan Illich, was reading this article, and then he just came up again around 4 months ago during the interview with Andy Matuszak in the supermemo.wiki Discord channel. And finally, he came up again maybe last week or 2 weeks ago. There's this institution called the Paris Institute for Critical Thinking, and they sent me one of their podcasts where they mentioned a little bit about Ivan Illich. And in particular, they touched on one of Ivan Illich's most interesting ideas to me, which is the notion of a web of peers who collectively seek knowledge, and also his idea of learning networks as an alternative to the traditional educational institutions and stuff. So I'm also creating a video response to the Paris Institute for Critical Thinking's podcast, because it was so interesting and I was so impressed by the person who was being interviewed in that podcast, Evreem. I can't remember her last name, but she did a very good job at very eloquently presenting some arguments as to why the traditional education system is not very good, basically. I'll leave a link to that podcast in the description because it's only 27 minutes long. But I was just blown away by how eloquently the arguments were put forth by Evreem. So and finally, I'm also writing an article hopefully focusing on this learning networks idea, because it's really sparked some ideas about the future of the supermemory.wiki Discord, and the future of education as a whole. I suppose we'll see, but anyway, that's really the idea that I want to explore today. And I'm going to start by just let's see, I think I pulled it up. Yeah, I've got the actual PDF of the book, which is quite short. It's only 82 pages, so I've already read up to page 12. I think I'll probably just start at the beginning and make sure I haven't missed anything out. I want to be absolutely sure that when I make a video on Ivan Illich's book, Deschooling Society, that I actually do know what he's talking about. So that's going to be what I'm going to be doing in this session, just making sure that I understand everything and that I haven't left any golden nuggets unmined. Right, so that's about it. I'm going to get into it. Yep, already, I mean, there's so much to unpack in this, not even a paragraph, just a couple of sentences, and it's already very interesting. It gives me a lot of ideas, because he's basically saying that there's nothing you can do with current institutions. You can't introduce new hardware, software, or anything like that in order to improve the current situation. You need to basically create the inverse of an institution, and he calls this an educational web. To me, the inverse of an institution is more like some sort of decentralized structure. So a web or a network actually is a very good way of putting it. What's exceptionally interesting about Ivan Illich is that he wrote this, at least it's published, let's see, I think it was in the 70s, 1971, so before the internet really took hold. But he's using terms like web and network all throughout this book, and that those are really the alternatives that he proposes to the traditional education system. And obviously, reading this as a person living in the year 2021, it's just, you can't resist but link this to the internet, which has presented so many new opportunities for delivering education and for finding other people to learn with. So I think that's really what attracted me to this idea. Right, yeah, so another point, the Paris Institute for Critical Thinking picked, they mentioned that, rather than creating an institution, an educational institution, what they were trying to create was an anti-institution. And it was an anti-institution in the sense that it didn't have a strong hierarchy. It was like a much more flat sort of organization rather than having layers upon layers of underlings, higher ups than the boss right at the top. Yeah, so that's just something else to explore. I want to make another point just before I forget it because it did come up today. So there had been a talk by a quantum physicist called Paul in the supermemory.wiki Discord, and I found it really interesting. He talked about the application of spaced repetition to mathematics, but he also talked a lot about his thoughts about free learning and how it's more of an optimal choice than going to school. He did make the point that I found very interesting, which was that up until the advent of spaced repetition, free learning was only like a small improvement in terms of learning speed over the traditional education system. But with the advent of spaced repetition, it's now the optimal choice because you get the pleasure of learning, you're free from coercion, plus you have spaced repetition, so you have the extremely efficient method of learning as well. Some of the stuff like about optimization of learning to Ivan Illich's argument, because his focus is on, why going to school is bad. It doesn't focus on why not going to school can be good, if you're trying to learn optimally. So that's one of the things that I want to add. And though we haven't really got into the book, we've barely got past page 1, I just want to write it down just so I don't forget. So yeah, the creation of artificial things to replace meaningful or the true underlying value or goal, that's going to be a key thing I want to focus on, because I think it's a consistent theme running throughout the entire system is the creation of something artificial to replace something else. So I like this. I'm not sure I agree with this. Only by channeling dollars away from the institutions which now treat. He talks about health, education, and welfare, but I suppose I'll just deal with education. Only by channeling dollars away from the institutions which now treat education can the further impoverishment resulting from their disabling side effects be stopped. I have some other ideas. I don't think it's the only way. I definitely agree that with the point that he's making here, just pouring more money in isn't going to help. I think this is a very good point, and it links to something I've been thinking about. I can't remember where I heard it, but it's like, can you think of learning as a preferential attachment process? By which I mean, if you, let's say you're very young, you're like 2 years old, and you learn a little bit more than another 2-year-old, or you learn a little bit faster just in that very early period. By knowing more things, you are then able to learn at a faster rate. The more you know, the faster you learn. So it's like there's like a Matthew effect in with wealth. Like the more money you have, the more money you're able to make. Is it the same with learning? So could that account for the differences, like large differences between adults in terms of their knowledge? Could it just be down to could you trace it all the way back down to when they were younger, simply one, having more opportunities to have educational opportunities casually available to them, such as conversation and books. Just those small advantages at young ages, could they, allow that child to build up enough knowledge that they then start having this snowball effect where they are able to learn more simply because they know more, and that other child who doesn't have these advantages available to them, they just get left behind. There are loads of instances of this Matthew effect, or I've heard it called preferential attachment, especially when it's talked about in like networks. So if you have like a social network and you have one person who has lots of friends already, well, simply due to the fact that they have lots of friends, they're going to be able to make more friends more easily than someone who doesn't have very many friends. So like new nodes that join the network are going to preferentially attach to hubs in the network. That's sort of what I'm getting at here. And I'm wondering if it's the same process in learning. Another good point there, like you can learn something in many different ways. You don't have to go to school to learn something, but often learning something at a school is seen as giving it sort of a credibility, a stamp of approval that makes that learning more legitimate than learning it in any other way, or even just by yourself. So yeah, definitely agree with this point. Yeah, the Paris Institute for Critical Thinking also made this point that the whole schooling industry across the world creates this caste system between nations, where you have countries which are considered to have very good educational systems. They're at the top of this caste system, and then you have countries which have educational systems which are considered to be poor at the bottom. And of course, it's the countries at the top who are deciding. They're the ones grading the nations of the world, really. So I'll link that to the podcast. This is, of course, one of the major benefits of the internet, right? The ability for many individuals to come together to finance or just lend their time to creating sort of free learning opportunities and resources. I think throughout this book, or at least to my memory, again, I only read up to page 12 and I'm still at page 10. So throughout this book, I think Illich makes a lot of comparisons between the education system and the state church. So he basically calls school the new state church, which I think is very interesting. And I don't know enough about the state church to know how well it applies. So I think that's something I could do some research into. I would obviously copy this into my collection because it's such a good line, but I know I already have it. I actually already have it as an item, so I don't need it. Right, so this is his idea of the constitutional disestablishment of the monopoly of the school. Yeah, you can't discriminate against someone based on previous attendance at some curriculum. Rather, you have to filter people based on the skills that they have wherever they've acquired them. I think that's what he's saying, and I don't know how realistic it is to expect this sort of thing to get passed, this sort of regulation or whatever. Yeah, I have some thoughts on it. My feeling here was that implementing this sort of reform would undermine the legitimacy of the people actually making the reforms, so that's why I kind of considered it very unlikely. What's interesting is that there are some industries in which people are actually chosen or are hired for jobs based on purely on their skills, regardless of actually how they acquired those skills. And probably the most obvious example of that is in the programming industry, right? People can get jobs based on having sort of a portfolio up on GitHub, which people can scroll through and see what they've done in the past. It's just not widespread, I guess. I'm going to make a weird point, but it seems related to me to the point I was making earlier about the Matthew effect in learning. The idea that if you have a lot of knowledge, it's easier to acquire more knowledge, right? In a certain sense, we've created sort of an artificial Matthew effect where in order to be admitted to some curriculum, for example, to university, you need to have acquired already some credentials at some institution lower in the hierarchy, like high school or whatever, right? So in order to acquire more credentials, which have been substituted for learning, real learning, right? You have to have already attended a bunch of other institutions as well. So it's like, I don't know, yeah, in order to acquire more credentials, you already have to have credentials. And so it just creates this, I don't even know exactly how to express it, but some strange, unnatural effect. To a large extent, you see this with lectures on YouTube, right? You can have one superstar lecturer on YouTube who can sort of corner the market for a certain academic subject, right? It's sort of like the market-based approach to lecturing. You just have one guy who everyone really likes, and everyone can just watch their videos rather than being forced to attend, for example, a university and listen to whatever some average lecturer is saying, right? Everyone can just sort of converge on the best one. I just skimmed that really quickly, but I think he's saying something interesting, and maybe he's not, but he's given me an interesting idea. So it looks back to the idea of school creating this artificial environment, and then you sort of exist in this artificial environment and learn skills and produce things. You do homework in this artificial environment, right? When it's much more meaningful to do things in the real world. You need to create things and learn things that have utility in the real world. So there's this example here, right? The Brazilian teacher, an adult can begin to read in a matter of 40 hours if the first words he deciphers are charged with political meaning, if they have some sort of meaning to them in reality, that they can actually go and use in their real lives. I think that's a real important point. And it's a systemic issue in the current education system, because you exist in this fake sort of bubble of school, and everything that you create, your homework, the tests, none of them actually go into reality. You know, they never get put into the marketplace of ideas. They never are shared into the world with people facing real world constraints, and like you're sort of cut off from the rest of society and the economic system. And so everything that you create, it isn't you never get good feedback, really. Basically, I think that's the point. You never get good feedback because the people giving you feedback aren't actually faced with real world constraints, and neither are you when you exist in the school system. So yeah, I think that's quite important to me. That's one of the things that I want to focus on. Probably going to have to reword that because it didn't really make sense, but I hope the core of the idea makes sense. Here we go, another excellent point. I remember this from the last time I read Deschooling. Basically talks about university as a matchmaker, right? And you're matching learning peers, essentially. And one of the things that's interesting about university is that you're not matching people based on like a book. You're not matching people based on, you know, when you sign up for university, you're not signing up to study just one single book or a chapter from a book. You're signing up to study with someone who's interested in just like macroeconomics as a whole or economics as a whole. What I read, what I sort of interpreted from this section was that one thing you could try would be matching people based on a small unit of mutual interest. So matching people simply based on like one paper or one book chapter or something like that, or just one single problem. And this is impossible at a school, but it's much more possible on the internet, where you can find people interested in very niche things, right? You can filter people based on a very small unit of mutual interest, like a single paper or a book. And I think that's one of the big advantages of the internet over an institution like a school or a university. Yeah, the most radical alternative to school would be a network or service which gave each man the same opportunity to share his current concern with others motivated by the same concern. So he states it quite generally here, like that could be your same concern could be, you know, reading a book or solving some small problem or something larger, I suppose. It's quite interesting, yeah. Like even in the supermemo.wiki Discord, you know, there are people who come together to study certain things. There's the study group, like people motivated by the same concern. They all want to study at the same time so that they can remain motivated in their studying, you know? The internet makes the creation of sort of ad hoc autonomous learning groups like that very simple, very easy. Right, yeah, here we go. I'm just going to read this part because I think it's really good. Let me give as an example of what I mean, a description of how an intellectual match might work in New York City. Each man at any given moment and at a minimum price could identify himself to a computer with his address and telephone number, indicating the book, article, film, or recording on which he seeks a partner for discussion. And then he could receive by mail the list of others who recently had taken the same initiative, right? There's real parallels perhaps to be drawn between like a cryptocurrency and this sort of decentralization and the disintermediation of the university as the matchmaker, right? So I'll just make a note of that. Maybe I can do some more connections later. He's making a very interesting point here about the difference between matching people based on a large overarching theme, for example, economics, as opposed to a single title, like a book, The Wealth of Nations, for example. and I really want to delve more deep, do a deeper dive into this idea, but I'm not exactly sure what he's saying right now, so I will create an extract and do it later. This point that he brings up here, not filtering or not matching people based on arbitrary things like their background or whatever. That's definitely true on the internet. I mean, like lots of the people who I've interacted with in the supermemo.wiki Discord, right? I don't know their name. Some of them I don't know their gender or anything. I've literally just communicated with them through text, but we might have had, significant exchanges, This has only become better and better with the internet, right? He's talking here about what you lose if you match with a person to do some learning, and you decide that actually this isn't worth it. Maybe the cost is too much in terms of time, or maybe that person just isn't very interesting, or they don't have very good takes on whatever you're discussing. The cost to you is very small. It's simply the amount of time you invested in talking with them. But to a college applicant, you might actually be stuck studying that thing. You might have incurred a bunch of fees, so you can't really drop out or whatever. Or on the internet, it's extremely convenient because if you join a Discord channel and you agree to do, for example, you agree to meet with some people every week to discuss some paper on some topic. If you decide that actually the value that we're getting from this isn't worth the cost, you can simply leave that channel. You don't even need to announce to everyone, actually, this isn't interesting to me. You can simply click the red X, and log off or whatever. It's a good point that school bundles a bunch of services together that don't need to be collected together. It's a good point. It's kind of like in software when you have like a monolithic program that contains lots of subprograms, right? It's often much more efficient and you get a better result when you combine lots of small modular parts into a larger system, right? Okay, so at this point, I'm going to go through the notes and start organizing things into buckets, I guess, buckets of themes that he's talking about and connecting things together, linking with some other topics or concepts in my collection. And then I can start organizing my thoughts about what I want to write about in this article and talk about in this video that I want to do. All right, so let's get into writing these notes. First, what I'm going to do is just search for Ivan Illich, and I'm going to do that because I suspect that I might have other stuff in my collection related to what he was talking about in Deschooling Society. Yeah, very interesting idea here about Twitter as sort of a matchmaker between learning peers. I mean, Twitter has a lot of garbage on it, but it does have potential, especially if you find the right community to enable interesting discussion, and it also enables the ability, like, to find someone to actually do a serious sort of project or serious discussion, serious learning with. But yeah, like I said, I have mixed thoughts about Twitter as a whole. It isn't perfect, obviously. But I can say that I have benefited even after just a week of using it, because the Paris Institute for Critical Thinking, they actually sent their podcast to me, which included a lot of discussion about some of Ivan Illich's ideas. They sent it to me over Twitter just based on the fact that I had posted an Illich quote So it does have a lot of potential, but it probably isn't the best platform for matching people specifically interested in learning. Discord, of course, is another good one. I mean, my experience in supermemo.wiki Discord channel has shown me that it's much easier to find people interested in quite niche interests. It's very difficult to find other people interested in spaced repetition. It's even harder to find people interested in spaced repetition and free learning. But the supermemo.wiki Discord, of course, is full of people interested in exactly those two things. And yeah, so it's very clear to me that the internet is permitting much more efficient matchmaking compared to institutional alternatives, right? So what I'd like to do is create perhaps even a concept for this, since it's kind of general, the idea of decentralized matchmaking. So I'm just thinking, where is the best place in the tree to create it? Often what I do, if I don't know where to put it, I'll just put it in this unsorted concepts folder. So I guess that's what I'll do now. And then I can just move it if I want to in the future. Then I will link this to the decentralized matchmaking idea probably without moving it. Actually, no, I will move it. I will move this into the decentralized matchmaking concept. Okay, so I was going to go to decentralized matchmaking, and I'll link that to decentralization, which is like I guess a broader class of decentralized stuff. One other inefficiency associated with matching people based on these large units of mutual interest, like large themes, just like economics or something, is that they are bound to curriculum and course structure and things like that. When you have people just matching with each other based on their interest in just some title or some paper, for example, they're able to dynamically switch and move around and create something that can quickly conform to the skills they need to acquire in like a really rapidly changing environment. So if there are, that's one of the things that people are saying about the future, is that we're going to need to be able to rapidly change the skills that we have and rapidly acquire new skills. The only real way to do that is to do so through not through a school where you're bound to a curriculum, but you need to be able to dynamically change actually what you're learning on the fly. This dissociation from obligatory attendance kind of links into the small unit of mutual interest thing. So rather than signing up to a course, you just sign up for individual sessions, and you can reallocate your time very easily. If you go to a session and you decide that the cost is too high, or the amount of value you're getting from that session is just too low, you can just never go to that thing again. But if you signed up for an obligatory course, or you pay a lot of money for the course and you want to make sure that you get your money's worth, those things make it much more difficult to dynamically reallocate those resources. So yeah, I definitely found that if you want to optimize learning and creativity, you kind of want to minimize the number of things in your schedule that are sort of fixed and can't be moved. So lectures are a good example. If you have fixed lectures at 9 a.m. every morning, then that's just a period of time that's kind of just deleted from your day. a time during which you, even if you had some creative idea or you had some project that you want to work on with something else that could provide a lot more value than whatever you do in the lecture, it's simply impossible because the lecture is obligatory or attendance is mandated or whatever. So you always, this perhaps could become part of a principle, like you always, in order to optimize learning, you always want to strive for independence or freedom, or you want to minimize unnecessary obligations. Yeah, this is another point that relates to the fake environment thing I was talking about earlier. The teachers or professors at academic institutions, they often have this sort of fake authority that isn't based on their skill. Rather, it's simply based on the fact that they are backed by an institution, which itself is kind of a fake artificial bubble. So I'll link this one to decentralization. Yeah. I think I should create a concept for the artificial environment thing because I think it keeps coming up. And I won't turn it into a concept yet, actually. I'll just move all of the extracts that concern an artificial environment to this folder so that I can find them easily. This one I think is from somewhere else in my collection, so I'm going to link this to Ivan Illich. Okay. So during this final part of the session, I was just grouping all of the extracts under the major themes from the book so far, and that will come in handy when I actually start writing the article and filming the video that I plan to make. Okay, so at this point I've pretty much grouped all of the major themes into folders and added all the extracts under there, and that will help a lot when I next come back to this in the future. But yeah, I'm starting to get pretty tired at this point, so that'll be it for me today, and I'll see you in the next one.